She actually had her book release party for her latest book last night, so it is hot off the presses. But we are going to talk with Dr. Maxell. Hello, Dr. Maxell.
Hello. I'm so blessed and happy to be here.
About her book, Ms. Typed. Ms. Typed. Here it is right here. Ms. Type. Are you Ms. Type? Discover your true dating personality and rewrite your romantic future. And we are going to talk about her book. She also has some books here available for sale. They'll be at the back table, and she will be signing them as well. So we're going to go ahead, and the first thing that we're going to do, since this is a day all about stories and sharing our stories, we're going to share a little bit of our story. So Maxell and I met each other through Angela James, who is in the center aisle right now. And I met Angela through her husband, Rob. Rob and Charles, my husband, Reverend Cam, went to junior high school together, and high school and college, which is where I met the two of them. So we actually have a lot of history going back. And we had just moved to Brooklyn, and Maxell had just moved to New York, and Angela and Rob came to visit. And we all went to lunch. And Maxell was looking for an apartment, and our building had a vacancy right above us. And she came and looked at it, and she ended up being my neighbor. And that was 15 years ago. And we've been friends ever since. And as often happens with friends, over the years, we grew together. I moved away. I had 2 more kids. She moved to New York, and she began doing all different kinds of things with her career. And we just kind of grew apart. You know, you just stop talking. You don't see each other as much. It just kind of happens. And one day on Facebook, like a year ago, she wrote a post about it being, 15 years?
It was 15 years. It's amazing, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I knew her before she was Lady J. And she knew me before I had ever been on television. Like, we've grown so much, so I'm just so extraordinarily proud of her and Charles and everything that they've done there. She's the same today as she was 15 years ago, but she's really just stepped up and become so much. I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thanks, girl. I'm proud of you, too.
It's nice, though, when years go by and you see someone and they are the same, especially when they've experienced success, because a lot of people get real brand new. When they move up over or wherever they're going, they start to have a new attitude and a new way of approaching each other. And we met. We had lunch in New York recently. And then I came out to Atlanta for the T.D. Jakes conference, and she and I just happened to be able, we didn't buy our tickets together. We didn't even know that we were both going to be there. And we saw each other, and we ended up spending the entire conference together. And it was such an amazing experience for me, because I hadn't experienced this new space that she's in, and she hadn't really experienced me in that kind of space. And so we were able to, like, even though it had been so many years since we connected, we had this opportunity to just very, very quickly get dropped into this spiritual space that just sort of made us immediately go like whoosh, right back together. But but with more purpose.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's amazing how we were talking about earlier about how our story is not just about us. And I remember when she posted that on Facebook, you know, and I responded, but I was like, you know what, this is probably like, you know, like her media email, or, you know, she probably doesn't even get this. And literally, like, I sent it, and like 5 minutes later, she was like, hey, girl, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, hey, girl. And literally, it was like no time had passed.
Yeah.
And like you said, the difference is before, you know, we were young. We were, you know, in the city. And so we were friends. We hung out. And we did all the things that friends do. And that was wonderful, and it was a blessing in our lives. But to be able to come full circle to this point, where it's also about the friendship, but it's also about what? Something more. That we have discovered that there's more to our stories, not just individually, but also together.
It was funny because when we met at the T.D. Jakes conference, we started talking a little bit about what we were both doing now. And then shortly afterwards, and I shared with her that I was really, really interested in the intersection between psychology and spirituality. I'm a psychologist by training. And she was telling me about the things that she was interested in. We were exchanging book titles and things that we should read. And I was like, man, this is so good. Like, don't you always feel like God sends you the message you need right when you need it.
Amen.
So here I was telling her these things that I was interested in, and she was like, you should read this and do this and do this and do this, and I'll read it too, and then we can talk about it. And I was like, how did he know? How did she know? He like, you know, God would just send people right into your life with this message. So, of course, like a month later, she texted me, and she's like, hey, girl, I'm doing a women's conference, and I know you were saying that you wanted to get, you know, more involved in these kind of things. So I was just thinking, you know, I would love to have you be there, and if you'd be interested, I mean, no pressure, but you said that you were interested. So anyway, if you could just, you know, think about it. She said, pray on it and let me know. So I was like, So I politely text her back. I said, okay, you know what? I'll do that. I will pray on it.
That's exactly what she did, too.
I was like, I will pray on it. Thank you. I already knew. It would have been impossible for me to say no. Not only because I wanted to come and support you, but it was meant to be. It was meant to happen. Just like we were meant to be at this conference together and meant to hear these amazing things and share all of this stuff in such a deep, intimate way. So I was very honored.
And it was interesting when God gave me the vision for this conference. You know, it was like, what, 3 months ago? 3 months ago, Ellipsis team? And, you know, it was one of those moments where the vision was so clear. And it was so concrete. And I was just like, okay. And everything I said, well, you know, we don't have any money. And sponsors just started showing up. And I was like, well, who am I going to get to do this? And I distinctly heard God say, go to your girlfriends. Go to your girlfriends. And on that first meeting, I said, okay, ladies, we got this vision. We don't have a budget. We don't have anything right now. But we are girlfriends. So go to your girlfriends. And it was amazing. Everything you see here, every speaker, every participant, everybody and everything you see was a girlfriend connection. A girlfriend who went out and said, girl, we're doing this conference. Can you come speak? We're doing this conference. Can you be the DJ? We're doing this conference. Can you? Harnessing the power of our relationships. When you're open and you share your story and you realize that it's not just about you. You realize that when that girlfriend calls and says, can you? You're like, okay. And, you know, I was nervous because she's big time now. So, you know, I was like, well, you know, we can't really, like, you know, we don't really have, like, a budget, you know, like, so, you know, like, what had happened was, like, you know, like, we could get you here and all, but,
And you know what? Because it was Jen, I wasn't even thinking about all that. I was feeling like I have to really come and do something good for her. This is what she's doing right now is so important. So I wasn't thinking about any of the practical stuff. I was thinking, what can I go and do that is right for her, that will help lift up this ministry? You know what I'm saying? Not that it would be this huge thing on me, but I just wanted to come and do my best work. You know what I'm saying? Like, she's my girlfriend, so I really wanted to be good. You know, it doesn't have to be on TV to mean that much. It means as much to me as anything I would be doing as a keynote is to be right here with you.
I'm not crying anymore today. I'm not crying anymore today. So we're going to go ahead and segue to talking about the book. And when the book came out, was it 3-4 years ago? You know, I saw it in the bookstore, and I was like, oh, that's my girl. Let me get this book. And I looked at it, and I was like, dating. You know, at that point, I'm 15 years into marriage, and I'm like, well, you know, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to buy it to support.
Thank you.
And I was like, but, you know, this really doesn't apply to me. And I started reading the book, and I was like, wait, how did we get here? This is supposed to be about dating. I'm not dating anymore. This is supposed to be about finding someone else, not about finding me. And I found that the concept of mistype was just so relevant and so powerful that I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to really kind of unpack it here today. And then you can buy the book, and unpack it some more for yourself later. So why don't we start by you just explaining to us and just telling us who is mistyped?
Mistyped is, we keep talking about authenticity today and being your authentic self. And mistyped is someone, it's a play on words, and mistyped. It's someone who has gotten so far past their authentic selves, particularly in dating relationships, that they're actually bringing this baggage of old relationships, of upsets, of disappointments, of hurt and anger, so that they're not even really being themselves in the relationship. So the person, you're having trouble in your relationship, but it's partly coming from the fact that you aren't really just being you. You aren't just comfortable in your own skin. And all these things that you may have experienced are all coming along with you. The person you're trying to get along with may not even know the real you. And it really started from a place of, women would always say, how do I get my man to do this? I'm so wonderful. I cook, I clean, I do everything. And how do I convince him to commit to me, marry me, things like that. And I just felt like you're always looking for a way to change the guy. But what you should really be thinking about is how to change yourself. Because then you'll change who you're willing to date. You'll change who you pursue. You'll change how you respond when certain type of people approach you, but just based on how you feel about yourself. So instead of me trying to give a whole bunch of advice about how to make a mismatch, become a match, I wanted to start all the way at the beginning and say, hey, when you're in a healthy, happy place, you will attract healthier, happier people. And when unhealthy people come into your life, you'll recognize it right away.
Now, I think that's so interesting, especially in light of what we've heard today. And I know when Dr. Spence was doing her workshop and she talked about the whole issue of boundaries and the boundaries that we put in place and that we don't put in place. How does that dynamic factor into the mistype persona that we have?
It does very much so. There's 10 different dating types, and they sort of, they correspond to your basic personality in general. It's almost like taking things that you would normally do that are great, but in excess become a problem. And a lot of times the different women don't have boundaries. A perfect example would be somebody like Miss Drama Queen, or even Miss Mom. Let's talk about Miss Mom. And she's in so many of us. She's one of the most sort of popular types in terms of where you might find yourself. Again, not knowing where to draw the line between what's her responsibility, what's the man's responsibility, and what's the responsibility of both of them in a relationship. So she's the one who's, again, as I was saying earlier, maybe she's cooking all the time, she's cleaning all the time, she's doing his laundry, she may be his life coach, she's his, she's doing his resume, everything he needs. She's loaning him her car and maybe giving him the money to put the gas in it too.
She's doing too much. I'm just saying.
You know what I mean? So not having that boundary of saying, like, this is how much I will do, and then some of this falls in your court. Not to get into like a tit for tat, well, I did exactly this and you did exactly that, but when you step so far out of your own boundaries, now you're doing everything. It's like a 90-10, nowhere close to 50-50. And of course, no relationship is truly 50-50, but you can get so far outside of yourself that if you were telling this, if someone was describing what you do in relationships to you, you would say, oh, she's crazy. Oh, she's so desperate. What's her problem? But when it's you, you have all these explanations and, excuses for why you're putting up with these things. So the boundaries are very critical because it is what keeps you from going so far outside of yourself that you lose even leverage, you lose respect from your partner when you do so much more, when you subvert your own needs to a certain level. They feel like, well, it is all about him, and it never gets back around. You figure, well, if I take care of him, he'll take care of me. Not if you push the boundary so far that that's not even an expectation.
Now, one of the things that I find that is so relevant about the book is even though it's talking about dating relationships, there are other relationships. And I'm interested to see, how does this mistyped dynamic function at work?
It's everywhere. And it's so funny because I haven't written the book, but I wanted to write you know, the follow-up mistyped at work, right, mistyped as a friend, because the concept still applies, where once again, you may have had so many difficult experiences at work that you find almost like you're in a box, where you've gotten into this space where people are sort of used to dealing with you in a certain kind of way, and you're almost letting go of your own dreams and wishes and aspirations because you feel like, well, I got to do all this for my boss, and I got to do all this for my team, and you kind of get lost. You get a little bit lost from what you were really trying to accomplish in the first place. People don't even know what you can do because you're so busy almost, you know, limiting yourself, and people don't even know your own, how far you could go.
Now, one of the dynamics that I also found really interesting was the way that we get to this place.
One of the things I talk about, there's 10 chapters for each of the 10 types, and one of the things I talk about is how you got to this space. And a lot of times it's based on your own sort of relationship baggage. You've had bad relationships. A lot of times we repeat the same mistakes and the same behaviors over and over again, you know, across these experiences. But it's also somewhat what you may have learned, what you may have watched as you were growing up. Your own mother, your grandmother, your aunts, even some of your friends. You know, I've done a lot of research on dating violence amongst teenagers, and it becomes normalized when you see other people going through the same thing. So then you don't feel so weird. You don't feel so different. Like, okay, this is what happens. You say something wrong, you get hit in the mouth. You know, you say something wrong, he takes your keys. Now you're not going anywhere. So it was just important to sort of talk about, for each type, kind of how you got there. I think a lot of times when you're growing up, too, you don't even realize how much you internalize what you see your mother putting up with. When my mother would get into an argument with her boyfriend, like clockwork, a week or two later, a dozen roses every time. It didn't matter what it was. She'd say, oh, we're going out to dinner. You know, I'm an only child. Sometimes only children hear too much. Sometimes moms talk a little bit too much to their only kids, right? So she said, oh, it was like the same routine. Take you out to dinner, buy you flowers. And so you kind of learn, okay, the guy says sorry, and he takes you out to eat and gets you some flowers, then that's it, right? It's resolved. Another thing I thought about when we were listening to some of the presentations earlier is how it is that something crazy happens at your house, and you see your mama could be crying, broke down, and when that doorbell rings, she's whipped together. And you learn that as well. So, you know, when you think about how you internalize that, so right, like I said earlier, a guy could have just hit you, you could have just found out the worst news ever, but you may have learned to just snatch your look together and be on your way. And that's what you start to do in your own relationships, whether it's violence, whether it's, you know, not making yourself a priority, not making your career a priority. A lot of us have observed our mothers deal with financial problems where they borrow money from their guy. But then you see the dynamic, that weird dynamic where now he's in control because you're borrowing money. And so you just start to learn all these different things. A lot of times, unfortunately, instead of us seeing those things and going, I'm not going to do that, you understand, okay, I fall on hard times, I can ask my man. Oh, but now I'm falling back into that same, you know, you have to get good and grown before you see yourself repeating the things that your mother did or your grandmother did. And you go, oh, I'm acting like my mama right now. I need to get it together.
Well, you know, my mother was perfect, so. And my mother's here.
Yes, she is.
I think one of the things that's so that we really wanted to focus on our stories is because when it comes to women and somebody says, what's your story? We have a tendency to go back to the past and to land on that hurtful, bad thing. And no matter how far we get away from it, we continue to go back and land, and we go back and land. And one of the reasons we wanted to focus on our story is because we wanted to start being intentional about the story that we tell and not just regurgitating the one incident or the many incidents in the past, but to realize that our story isn't just what happened then. It's what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future. So how does Miss Type get from what she learned and what she experienced and who she was to where she is now that can launch her into her future?
There's a quiz in the book that lets you sort of know what your type is. And some people are one, some people have been many different ones over time. And so at the end of each chapter, there's this sort of transformation exercise where there's information about how to sort of get from where you are to where you need to go based on your type. But then also in the back of the book, there's a whole mistype makeover kit that includes lots of sort of life coaching and life skills, exercises, worksheets, questions you need to ask and answer, things you need to be thinking about, looking for, fears that you need to let go. So there's that sense of, my general feeling is that, again, everything starts with you. Because when you're transformed, your behavior is transformed. The world around you becomes transformed. So the reason I wanted there to be so many exercises in the book, I didn't want it to just be a bunch of sort of generic feeling advice, but I wanted people to have that sense of, well, let me get my life together in a certain kind of way. Because, yeah, if my finances are straight, then I don't have to borrow any money from a guy, and then he can't control me with that. You know, let me get my weight together so I don't have to feel judged by this person and then feel insecure, so I might put up with things I wouldn't otherwise put up with if I felt more beautiful and I felt more confident. So I really want people to not only read the book to sort of get the general advice on how to handle things in their relationship, but I really want people to help themselves transform. I did all the exercises in the book myself, too, because that's kind of how I got to the idea. I knew I needed it also. I was telling too many stories about what had happened and what wasn't right and why I was not where I should be because of this and these things and these experiences. And I was like, I'm tired of this. I don't want to carry this baggage anymore. One of the types is Miss Bag Lady, and I've definitely been her. When you're walking around wounded, you bring that wounded self into those relationships. And it might not have anything to do with that person, but they're dealing with your depression. They're dealing with your anxiety. They're dealing with your worry. They're dealing with your insecurity. And it's not on them, but we want our partners to be our lovers, our best friend, our pastor, our husband, our life coach, our everything. And one person can't do all that for you. At some point, you have to do it for yourself. We're so busy doing it for everybody else, but we have to start with ourselves. You can't save anyone else before you save yourself. If they're drowning, you got to grab a hold to the side of the pool first. That's why they always tell you, put your oxygen mask on first, then you put it on the other person. But we're so quick to take it. We say, oh, we can't take time out for our mental health. We can't take time out for coaching or counseling or therapy. But all the things that you're dealing with that need to be resolved in that mental health space, it will play itself out in your relationships. And your children will suffer, and your marriage will suffer, and most of all, you will suffer. When you get healthy, your entire family ends up getting healthier with you.
Now, we do have some younger girls in the group, and one of the things before we end this that I wanted to kind of address was, how do you prevent yourself from becoming a mistype?
I think when you start being really real with yourself, and sometimes it means just writing a list of the things that you think you do really well and the areas where you think you might be struggling. Like, we talked about not judging each other. Sometimes we are just our harshest critic. We're just so hard on ourselves. We need to be a little bit softer, soft enough that we can admit to ourselves what our issues are, so we can start working on them. It's okay. We're all a work in progress. So when you start with thinking about, okay, where am I struggling? Where do I find myself kind of repeating the same kind of problems? That's where you can begin. And it was said earlier, you can talk to your girlfriends, but your girlfriends are often dealing with the same stuff you're doing. And y'all might be giving each other really terrible advice. You know what I'm saying? It's true. Sometimes your girlfriend... One piece of advice doesn't work for everybody. I could tell Jen how to handle something, but we have totally different personalities. What works for me might not work for her. And sometimes your friends are giving you the advice that works for them, but not something that would work for you. So, when you create that space for yourself, you can start to work on your own issues and then ease your way back into the dating scene. I think people are afraid to take time out. That's all right. You just broke up with somebody, give yourself 3 to 6 months. Deal with whatever heartbreak you may have before you get into the next relationship.
One of the things that we really wanted to make sure that we really allowed people to do here was to have the space to actually put some of what we've talked about into action. And Dr. Maxell and I talked beforehand, and we decided that part of doing that would be the flow of our workshops. So after this, we'll have a very, very, very short break, and she's going to go into her workshop where we're kind of going to get to work. We've heard a lot today, and we've experienced a lot today, and we've cried a little bit, and we've shared, and we've laughed. We ate, and now it's time to roll up our sleeves. We're going to do a little bit of work, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to do our vision boards. Because one of the things that we discussed was that, it's really hard to have vision and to go forward if you can't let go, and if you're constantly letting things hold you back. For our concluding question, I wanted to know, what would you say is the most important factor in being able to move on from being mistyped?
I think sort of on the human level, it's forgiveness. But I think the issue on a lot of levels is more spiritual. And I think that one of the things I always try to remind myself is that if I really believe in God the way I say I believe in God, then why am I acting like I'm acting? And so if God has forgiven you, what makes you think that you shouldn't forgive yourself? That just doesn't make any it just doesn't make any sense. You're above God. If God said this is already he said it's done already, so are you insist on keeping it going? Like, what are you waiting for? What else does he have to say besides what's written in the Bible? So I think it's us letting ourselves go, but praying for it, but also receiving the healing, being open to say, well, no, he said it's done now. You're forgiven, move on. We get stuck in our own humanity and want to, sometimes it's a nice excuse sometimes when you don't fix things, because then you don't have to take any risks, and you don't have to go anywhere, and you don't have to do anything difficult or unfamiliar. You can just stay in a space where you're just spinning your wheels, and it's always somebody else's fault. But when you're really ready to change, yeah, you got to be ready to take the dive, and you're going to need God to be with you. So I think you do as much as you can on a personal level, and then I think you got to pray and be in constant partnership with God, because he will show you the way to go.
And I think that's the perfect place to put a pin in it, as they say. I want to thank Dr. Maxell. Thank you.
Thank you, Lady J.
You're welcome. And I want to thank you all for being a very wonderful and attentive group all day. And as I stated earlier, we're going to take about 5 minutes, and then we'll go right into our next session.